Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Late Night in the Midlands. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having us on.
Oh, thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking the time out to be with us. And I've got to say, I was telling the listeners, I've been doing this for over 8 years now, and I've never had the interest in Bigfoot that I do now. It's picked up, and you know what? You've added to that today, because a fantastic job, and I've kept my word. I've not shared it, but boy, I'll tell you, it's good.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Oh, absolutely. So why don't we start out with a little bit of background with you guys, and I mean, what got you so interested in I don't know, the unknown, I guess, the paranormal, the hairy creatures.
Yeah, well, my story is pretty bland. Brandon's is actually a lot more interesting. But basically, I've kind of had an interest in, UFOs and Bigfoot and all this kind of stuff since I was a kid. But back in the early 2000s, a friend of mine told me about a series of possible unusual creature sightings outside of the town I grew up in, which was this tiny town in southeastern Ohio. So I kind of started researching it myself, and I guess you could say investigating it, but investigating it basically consisted of me driving on dirt roads at night. And so I came to find out, there might have been something to it, and that was that's the quick and dirty version of what kind of got me into all of this, is that, just kind of going down and actually talking to a couple of people who might have seen something, and realizing that there might not be a quick and pat answer to the whole phenomenon. But again, like I said, Brandon's story is a lot more interesting.
and I definitely want to hear it, but I do want to, I don't know if you're hearing it, but there's a little distortion in your sound. I mean, it's not horrible, but it's there. I don't know if it's, if you're too close. It almost sounds like you're too close to the mic, and I don't know.
That's possible. Is this better?
That is better. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I'm probably eating the microphone.
Hey, I've been there, done that. All right. So yeah, let's hear your story, Brandon.
Yeah. Am I distorted at all, or is this good?
No, you sound good.
Okay. Actually, I never had an experience, but my dad had an experience when he was young. He was camping in Marietta in southern Ohio, in the Wayne National Forest, and he was camping with his family. They were sleeping inside of a van, and he couldn't sleep, so he was sitting up in the driver's seat of this van, just kind of staring off into the darkness, and he heard these 3 extremely loud, long scream roars kind of thing, and he described it as being kind of starting off like a man screaming and then ending with like an animalistic growl. And he said it was way too powerful for a man to have done, because the power that was coming out of whatever was making these sounds was, the lungs must have just been extremely huge on it. So scared him half to death. And then I kind of, later on when I was like in my early teens, I got really interested in the UFOs and stuff, just like Seth and Bigfoot. And I was on a website and found this Bigfoot website that had Bigfoot supposed vocalization recordings, and I was playing through them, and one sounded just like what my dad had described when I was a kid. And so I brought him down and showed it to him, and he got goosebumps, and he was freaking out because it was pretty much identical to what he had heard. And the recording I played for him is the Ohio howl. I think it was recorded in '94. Is that right? So
I think so.
I think Moneymaker recorded it in '94, and it was exactly what he had heard. And it's interesting because, I listen to a number of other kind of radio shows that are kind of in the subject, and there's a lot of people that will come on and they'll tell their own story, and a lot of them will describe that they've heard that same kind of sound. They'll always refer to like the Ohio howl and stuff, which I just find really interesting. It's cool because it corroborates my dad's experience, and then it also kind of lends a little bit of authenticity to these things kind of existing a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sound is distinct, and it is described by many who claim to have these encounters. Now the red eyes, the red eyes, and even the beams coming out of the eyes. Now that's something that's kind of new to me.
Yeah, that was new to me too.
I find it
knew
interesting.
Yeah, I knew of the red eyes, and I've heard the red eye reports obviously a lot, but I'd never heard anyone refer to a kind of beams shooting out of the eyes. And we saw that interview that I think you're referring to, that's in Beast of Whitehall. We saw that interview recently. When was that? Back in, I want to say November. It was
Which interview?
Yeah, the Cliff Sparks.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was after filming had wrapped is when we kind of came across that interview, and that ended up in the movie kind of late in the game. But I thought it was kind of vital because you hear a lot, if you're associated with that story, you hear a lot about Cliff Sparks and his sighting and these red eyes. But I had never heard that thing. He talks about how basically it was almost like laser beam shooting out of its eyes. And we've talked a little bit, Brandon and I have talked a little bit about that as maybe he was just interpreting the eye glow in that way. I don't know if you have a theory on that or not.
I don't know. I mean, I've always thought, like when you shine a light on wildlife, you'll see eye shine. And I always wondered, like for example, in the Whitehall case, this creature was seen off the side of the street, kind of in the light that comes off of the side of the car lights. And so it could have just been eye shine in such a way that maybe their eyes are just they're just there in such a way that they give off a red eye shine in some way, and they're not. So it's not like, I don't know if it's actual. They're glowing red as if from like a fluorescent source, like bright red, or if it's some kind of just kind of eye shine. But I've heard other people like Scott Harriet, who's described it as when he saw as the eyes shining like the glow of an exit sign. Like in a movie theater, like an exit sign coming out, that kind of strong. Or another person, I think, didn't even Brian describe it as the end of a cigarette, like when you take a draw or whatever, like that kind of glowing red. So that, in those cases, it wouldn't be just some random eye shine. It would be like legitimate glowing red
from the source.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the way he made it sound like with the beams, I was wondering that too. Was it just reflections coming off the eyes or not? But it seemed like there was more than one description of this creature having red eyes, at least.
Well, this is something that didn't make it into the movie, but there is a history in New York State, obviously, and we go into that a little bit, but there's a history in New York State of these creatures, but there's also historical mention of the eyes. And I'll probably try to get this as an extra on the DVD, but Paul talked a little bit about how the Native Americans referred to it wasn't as upfront as they had red glowing eyes, but it was more like it had something to do with the eyes being, like blood red or something. It was kind of a little more vague, but it was, if you wanted to read that into it, you could almost read this into that native kind of cultural thing.
Well, if you go into a pet store and stuff, sometimes you'll see rabbits or mice or whatever that have red eyes. So I guess it wouldn't be unusual, right?
No, it wouldn't be unusual, but it's the fact that they seem to have their own luminescent glow, even when there aren't any lights around. So that is unusual, especially in this Whitehall case. There's out of everyone that saw this thing, I swear it's got to be like 60% of the people that saw it up close. It might have been everyone recounted seeing the red glowing eyes. I mean, it seems to be constantly referred to in this case.
Mm-hmm. So what made you guys want to take on the Whitehall account? What was so unique about that one?
The Whitehall case for us, I think what kind of spurred us to go ahead and do this is that Paul Gosselin, who was he's in the movie as much as we can get him in. He's, audio tape interviews, photos, and all that kind of stuff. He was one of the original witnesses, and he actually passed away in May of last year, actually the same day that we premiered our first movie, Minerva Monster. It was the same day that we premiered that movie. He passed away, and we had already been discussing doing the Whitehall movie. In fact, we had decided Whitehall will be our next movie. And when he died, it it kind of gave me a kick in the butt because at that point I wasn't 100% sure we were going to be able to do it. It was more like, let's do Whitehall if we can afford to go to New York and make this movie. And when he passed away, it kind of lit the fire under our tail to say we got to get this done. And it's a fascinating story, not just because of the location, which is this amazing rural, isolated kind of section of New York, and the beautiful mountains and all that kind of stuff. But it's a really unique story because there's so many police officers and law enforcement officials connected to it, which I've never seen in another case. In fact, I don't think anyone has. I don't know of a case where you've got 11 members of law enforcement at the scene of a Bigfoot sighting.
And I'm glad you brought that up because that's exactly what intrigues me most about this is the law enforcement that is involved and put their necks out on the line talking about this, and they talk about logs that went missing and all kinds of stuff, and I'm thinking, wow.
Yeah, no, the story is multi-layered because you've got two stories at play, in my opinion. You've got this story of the three kids in the car, which on its own is a fascinating little, kind of side jaunt. It kind of calls to mind those classic like 70s horror films or something. These three kids on a back road see a monster. But then you've got this other element that's like, an entire section of law enforcement. You've got local law enforcement, you've got state law enforcement, city. It's a lot of people that saw this thing, and to me it's two separate stories, but it's really kind of cool because you've got at the center of it the Gosselin family, because you got Paul as the teenager seeing it earlier in the night, and then you've got his father and his brother who were the police chief and a law officer seeing it, in two separate occasions. But I just find it fascinating that every story we go to, we try to find that what's at the heart of it, and it always seems to be people. And this story definitely has that. But it's to me, it's one of the more multi-layered Bigfoot stories out there. So just to get to interact with it and partake in being one of the people that gets to tell the story was a big deal for us. And the fact that this was originally supposed to be a 15-minute short film, and we were able to turn it into what I feel is a really good length, which is around 40 minutes. I just am really proud of what we were able to do here.
Oh, well, I'll tell you what, I enjoyed it so much so that when it ended, I was kind of upset. I was hoping, I could have gone for another hour of that. That was good. It really is. I mean, I think that you guys really caught the attention. You definitely caught my attention. And like you said, the law enforcement that was involved who spoke up about this, I'm not going to believe for 1 minute that all these people got together and decided to make up some big lie. I don't believe that at all. So that tells me that this thing's real and these people seen it.
Right, and this is a story that's corroborated in local newspaper. There's actually one of the more frustrating sides of it is there were 2 television reports done on this story back in 76, and unfortunately I haven't been able to track those down, but there were 2 original television interviews. In fact, one of the interviews had one of the teenagers in the interview, but I mean, law enforcement was in the background in one of them. It was just, this is all corroborated that there were this many people there, multiple, I'm not going to say we have eyewitness testimony from every one of these law enforcement officials that said they saw something, but we know from, hearing the testimony of other people that were there. We know from hearing the testimony of Dan Gordon and Glenn LaRose, who were friends with, Whitehall PD officers who were there that saw this thing. I mean, it's pretty well a sure thing that most of the people that were there that night had an encounter with this creature, which is just, in a way, it's kind of mind-blowing.
It is mind-blowing. I thought, we kind of been jumping through it a little bit here, but how about you guys, give a little bit an account of this story and what went down, and maybe hit some more of the good points on it, and then I'd like to know what you guys think that they were actually dealing with here in Whitehall. I mean, is this Bigfoot? Is this some form of Bigfoot? I mean, and where do you guys stand personally on this? I mean, you've got to actually believe if you're doing this kind of work, right?
I'm definitely a believer that it's a fascinating subject. I'm actually not like a stone cold believer, but I think that there's a lot more going on here than just misidentification or hoaxes too. So
Okay.
that's where I stand.
I see. So yeah, tell everybody a little bit about the story, and when will this be available for people?
It's scheduled to come out on April 1st on DVD, but it will be available on March 3rd to people that back our Kickstarter campaign for the next film we're making, which is about the Legend of Boggy Creek Falk monster. It's called the Boggy Creek Monster. So on January 30th, 1st, we're launching a crowdfunding campaign, and anyone that backs that film will actually have access to a digital copy of the movie a full month before the release. So there's kind of two ways to partake of it. And then it's going to be on TV in New York State. So there's going to be a lot of release options for folks. But yeah, the movie centers around, I mean, I guess what we wanted to do was kind of twofold thing here. We wanted to tell the story of Whitehall, but we also wanted to tell kind of the history of the cultural impact that this particular Bigfoot story had on Whitehall and also the Adirondacks in general. So we kind of try to show that this is a huge area and that there's a long history of possible Bigfoot sightings in this region that go back centuries, and that in a lot of ways the region hasn't exactly embraced it, but they have accepted it. So, but the movie centers around this one particular incident, and then kind of a week-long series of events that followed it. But it started with three kids who were driving on a rural stretch of dirt road, and as we say in the movie, they encountered something unknown. But they basically ran into what they called a monster, which was a 7-foot tall kind of. It's not necessarily your classic Bigfoot description, I don't think, because this creature seems to have been a little thinner. Like, it's always described as kind of maybe thin. Is that true, or am I saying this right?
Well,
kind of thin.
Yeah, I mean, Dan Gordon is a person who saw it later.
Gaunt, yeah.
And he said that what he saw that crossed the road was a gaunt, mangy kind of animal.
Yeah.
But if you look at Paul's actual drawing of it, it doesnn't look super skinny. I mean, it's got big shoulders,
Right.
and it's got a big chest. I mean,
Muscular buttocks. That's
and they described it as muscular. Bart Kenny, in one of the audio tapes that we have from one of his interviews back in '76, he describes it walking away and having a real big muscular back.
Mhm.
So I don't know if it was super skinny, but it was definitely
it's just a little different to
Uh-huh.
me. The classic kind of Eric Miner description or illustration of it has always been my mental image of what the Whitehall creature looks like. So if anyone watches the movie, you'll get to see that illustration. It's really cool. But anyway, these three kids driving on this rural stretch of road late at night, they see this creature. They see it multiple times. They actually turn around, go back down the street, come back, see it again, go back into town, get someone else, come back out, see it again. And then they go back to town a third time, and they actually get one of the boys' father, and that boy was Paul Gosselin, and they got his father, Wilfred, and they came back out to Abear Road along with other members of law enforcement. And when they get out there are multiple members of law enforcement and then some locals who had happened upon the scene and thought it was possibly like a crime scene or something strange was going on. So you've got all these people kind of converging on this one sighting location, and there's basically these people, all these people have a sighting of something walking across the field, and that kind of sparks this week-long series of events. You've got the boys' older brother, Brian Gosselin. He has a sighting the very next night when he and a state trooper go out to Abear Road, and they have an encounter. That's kind of the centerpiece of the movie in a way. I think Brian's encounter. He does such an amazing job of recounting that. I don't know what you thought of it, Michael, but I just think that scene is kind of the centerpiece for the whole film, is kind of Brian's recounting of what he saw. But he sees it the next night, and then we kind of go into a little bit that there was a lot more that went on that week as well, and there was stuff that we were not able to cover in the movie simply because it didn't necessarily fit in. But there was, there were UFO sightings. We did mention that briefly, that there was a kind of a UFO angle to this, that same week that all this was going on, there were UFO sightings all over.
Interesting.
And we've got a lot of information on that I'm going to be able to include on the DVD because Paul Bartholomew, who is in the movie as our local historian, he's done a lot of research into the UFO stuff, and he gave us a ton of info on that, almost enough to make a mini doc, like maybe a 6 or 7 minute mini documentary that we'll include on the DVD, I think, about kind of that side of things, because it is really fascinating that while all this Bigfoot stuff was going on, there's also this huge UFO flap, to the point where there was actually a UFO landing in Whitehall, and I'm talking literally downtown Whitehall. He sent me a map of where this sighting location happened, and it's right across. I mean, there's houses. It's in the middle of a neighborhood. Supposedly a UFO touched down in this lady's yard, and this is the same week that all this stuff's going on. So basically, chaos kind of erupted around Whitehall that week. And there was a lot of ridicule aimed at the police officers and the teenagers, and it kind of died off after that. And honestly, I don't know that Whitehall hasn't necessarily completely come around on this subject. They kind of are interested in it, and they see the value in it, I think, as a tourism attraction, but they're not 100% on board yet with discussing it and kind of promoting Bigfoot. But
and I wouldn't doubt that if people who had anything close to do with this, I would not doubt for a moment that they were told to keep their mouths shut. I mean, honestly, especially if UFO related. We know there's big hush-hushes on that, and I find it so interesting. The UFOs, I had a guest on a week ago, it might have been, and we were talking about that very thing, how, there have been Bigfoot sightings that also, in that same area were UFO sightings. And I kind of myself, I'm one of those people who kind of link the two, only because they seem to always disappear. I mean, where are they going? It just sounds like some beam me up Scotty kind of stuff.
Right. It is really bizarre. I thought the other thing I thought was odd about it, and that might possibly gives an explanation for the kind of standoffishness of the police department and the way they were kind of told to back off the case. I thought it was very interesting that so many people in and around Whitehall were having all these sightings and stuff around the same time, and maybe there was, a link here where people in Whitehall in particular, like city officials and law enforcement, didn't want to be seen as the city where people are seeing Champ and they're seeing UFOs and they're seeing a Bigfoot. So, that could explain the ridicule factor as well. We talked a little bit about that too when I was there.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you guys are doing, you guys should actually, honestly, you should pitch one of those cable networks to doing like a Bigfoot Chronicles or something, because what they've got on TV now really sucks. I mean, what you guys are doing is much better. I'd rather than seeing some idiots going and acting like they're hunting Bigfoot, I would rather see, people's stories be, played out. I think that would be more beneficial. I mean, I think it's that good.
So, wow, thank you so much.
Yeah, that's kind of what we set out to do with all this is do the opposite of what most of the cable shows are doing. And actually, I mean, I think there's a huge audience of people out there who are interested in this subject, who see the kookiness of some of the other shows, and it automatically turns them off to the subject as a whole. And I think what got me into all of this wasn't, Bobo or whatever smacking a tree. It was, the stories of people's sightings. I don't necessarily care to watch people go hunt for Bigfoot. I want to know how the people felt and how they feel today about their sightings, that they had.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, in the 8 years I've been doing this, I've heard a lot of stories, and I'm not quick to call anybody no liar because I've had my own UFO sightings. Now, I've never seen a Bigfoot, but I have seen these crafts in the sky, and they're real. And I don't know, I can't say where they're coming from. I didn't see their license plate or any of that, but there's some strange stuff. And I mean, and for me, if it's just a light in the sky, I don't know what it is. But I mean, I've seen a couple of these things up close where you could actually, I mean, one looked like just like something out of the Jetsons. I mean, it looked identical. It was a disc with two, bubble on top and a bubble on the bottom. And I'm thinking, I mean, this is just crazy that, here's these cartoons and stuff. I mean, that's exactly what some of them look like. And I'm thinking, what do they know? So interesting. So what's your next venture? What are you going to be covering next? And what have you covered in the past? I mean, is it just Bigfoot, or do you cover other kinds of creatures?
We're going to branch out beyond Bigfoot, but so far Minerva Monster was a Bigfoot movie, and that one was our first film, which we actually shot back in 2014. And it's centered around a Bigfoot sighting that took place actually not far from where we live in Ohio. It's the town of Minerva. And that film centered around one particular family who had a rash of sightings that took place on their property outside of the town of Minerva, and kind of how the town reacted, and some of their interactions with the creature. And that's a really unique case because it centers around this one particular family, and it's not just about their Bigfoot, but also how the town ridiculed them and all that kind of stuff. And that movie got a huge response, especially here in Ohio. It kind of ballooned overnight on us, which we weren't expecting. We have our own Minerva Monster Day festival now out in the town of Minerva, where we actually host a festival, and this year we're going to be able to do it again, and it's a really cool kind of thing. We get to show our movies. We have a huge kind of crowd of people that come out to watch, and it's fascinating because you were talking about how there's you kind of appreciate this approach to it, and obviously other people do too, because we get a lot of positive response to it from not just from people who are into Bigfoot either, but people who are into just these types of topics in general. But that was our first film. In our second film, obviously, Beast of Whitehall. What we're working on right now with Whitehall is a lot of post-production stuff. Brandon is working on score, because Brandon actually is the film composer for the music in our films as well. And he's still putting the final touches on the score. The movie is out for submission to 7 film festivals currently, and we'll probably submit to a few more. So we hope to actually get to screen it around the U.S. And then following that is the Kickstarter, like I said, the crowdfunding campaign for Boggy Creek. And then we're going to start filming Boggy Creek Monster in spring, along with Lyle Blackburn, who is, I don't know if you've heard of Lyle, but he's an author and a researcher. He wrote a fantastic book called Beast of Boggy Creek, which kind of centered on that 1971 horror classic and kind of gave the backstory on it and all that. And that's our next project. We hope to have that one out sometime next spring with an eye towards, hopefully getting it into theaters and all that kind of stuff. We really want to continue pushing these films as far as we can get them. I mean, originally Whitehall was supposed to be a 15-minute movie. We ended up with a nice 40-minute runtime, so that was a shock to us. So there's a lot of stories to be told. So beyond Bigfoot, I would love to do Champ. I'm fascinated by lake monsters, so I'd love to move into that. Maybe some sort of Thunderbird or flying humanoid, something like that. There's all kind. Every town has their little like lore and legend.
Yeah, we've got the Lizard Man here in South Carolina.
Yep, and Lyle wrote a book on the Lizard Man, so yeah. I'd love to do a Lizard Man movie. Actually, that story really fascinates me.
And there's actually a sheriff or a deputy sheriff, I forget, who came out. He was on the local news. I mean, his car was all chewed up, and he said there was a Lizard Man who attacked his car. I mean, so there's another account from law enforcement. And, you know, he's credible until he says something like that, and all of a sudden, oh, he's a nutcase.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's fascinating how that happens, and we had law enforcement in Minerva in our first film as well, although he was a little more on the skeptical side, but he comes down on the side that the family was probably telling the truth, and, you know, in his opinion, whatever happened in Minerva is an unexplainable kind of event. But Ohio's different. Ohio's a unique kind of state, or I guess it's not unique, but it's just different from how Ohio approaches the topic of Bigfoot as opposed to how the state of New York approaches the subject of Bigfoot, because that area of New York where Whitehall's filmed is very closed off to it, but here in Ohio they love it. You know, it's in the news every day. It seems like Bigfoot shows up somewhere.
Yeah. See, I'm the Bigfoot thing. I'm taking a little more serious than I have in the past. Now, it's not that I never, you know, I know that there's so many people who had accounts, so I always thought there was something to it, you know. But, you know, it's just once the internet came along, I mean, everybody and their uncle, you know, you got people who are feeding Bigfoots, but they don't take pictures of them because it's disrespectful and da-da-da. I mean, I've heard it all. And then you come across something that you guys had put out, and it's very credible, I think. And so, you know, it's nice to see that instead of the wild story, you know?
I think both sides of those stories can be credible too, though, because like in the Minerva case, they considered their Bigfoot, if that's what you want to call it, a pet.
Really?
And they actually claimed to feed it as well. But to hear them tell the story, it doesn't come across quite as wacky as you might think when I'm sitting here saying that. You know, this is a family who didn't want any attention at all. They called the police, you know, on the incident of their initial, you know, sighting of this thing, and they didn't do it, you know, because they wanted to be on the front page of the paper, but they ended up on the front page of the paper. And, you know, to hear them tell it, they almost in a way, you know, regret that any of this stuff ever happened, or that they ever called the media or you know, police in the first place.
See, but I guess if it was me, and maybe it's just because of the host and the media thing that I do here, if it was me, I mean, I would have to try to get some evidence. That's like an ET landing here every night, coming to meet me, and the deal is, you know, you're not to take any pictures or show anybody. I'd have to try to find a way to get a picture of that thing and sneak it out somehow to people. I don't know.
Well, Brandon has more of, and Brandon actually got to spend a bunch of time there this past summer. And what is their kind of take on photos? Like, they don't take photos for a reason.
Well, they do have they do have 3 photos that they've taken, and I don't know why. I mean, I'm kind of with you guys and other people that have talked about it. Why? If these things shown up as frequently as they claim, you know, why isn't there video or pictures of it? I don't. But they do have 3 pictures that he showed me. He didn't show us when we were filming it, because just like Seth was saying, he didn't really trust anyone. The family doesn't. They're not really. They were so ridiculed back then that they're kind of closed off to wanting. You know, they've had TV shows and different people try to speak to them about this over the years, and we were kind of the first ones that had access. Any kind of in-depth access, especially filming the property and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, and then now that the film has been out, they totally trust us because they know that we didn't show them in a negative light. We didn't make fun of them, etc. We took their story seriously, so now they trust us and they've had us back on the property, and we go hang out there every once in a while, and it's definitely an amazing piece of property. But they have 3 photos that they showed me when I went there, and they're kind of what people call blob squatches in a way. I mean, the one they took when they were driving on a 4-wheeler through there, and they were just taking pictures of the scenery as they were driving. And then when they looked at the pictures later, they saw this thing. And you look at the picture, and it does look like a huge, tall, upright creature. I mean, it's running. You can tell that it's running. It's got its arms like in a running motion, and you can see kind of the black hair coming off of the arms. There's another picture where This one is a little bit more kind of sketchy. It looks, it's a part of a tree essentially. It's like it has gray hair on the arms. You can kind of see the arms, but the gray is the same kind of color as the tree that it's kind of standing behind. So you can't really tell if it's the tree itself, and it just looks kind of. But then the third one was the one that was most convincing to me. This one was, again, it was kind of standing behind a tree to where it was so wide, its torso was so wide that the tree is kind of in the middle, and you can see it coming out on either side of the tree, and you can see the arms, and the forearms are just huge, and you can see the kind of the matted hair coming off the forearms. But what was interesting was on the head, you can't see any facial features, but you can see the hair that comes off the head, and on either side it goes down long, like a long hair on a person, and it's kind of like a blonde color, and you see the arms, the forearms, and they're kind of like a grayish brown color, and then this blonde hair coming off of their head. And it's really weird because the hair on the forearms kind of looks a similar color to the trees that it's standing behind. But then you have that blonde color, and it's totally natural color. It doesn't look like any part of that tree, which was kind of interesting to me.
Well, some people kind of link them to something like the Nephilim or stuff like that, and I don't know. They say that they're the ancient giants or what have you, and I think it's beyond that. I don't know. It's just the way they're able to. I mean, because people scale the woods all the time. You think they'd come across one of them. So my guess is that they're not caving out or hanging out or sleeping in the woods so much. I think that they're able, unless they're, again, able to just, blend in. Like, we've got like lizards here that if they get in a certain color of brush, they could turn that color, and you wouldn't see them. So maybe they're doing something like that. But you think in New York, in the wintertime, the leaves all fall off of everything. And if you've ever been in the woods in New York in the wintertime, it could look pretty bare. I mean, you could see a lot.
Well, yeah, but the main thing there is that when you're talking about the Adirondacks, there are people.
Well, that's true.
You can go to sections of the Adirondacks and not bother, not run into people. I mean, to drive from where we stayed the first time I went to Whitehall to make the movie to where to Whitehall, it was 90 minutes. We passed through one town on a 90-minute drive, and I never had cell reception. So, I mean, you're really isolated. And I tried to, through narration and stuff, we tried to get that across. And obviously, I think the opening shot of the movie helps to establish that this is a very forested place. I mean, the movie opens with that, the drone shot from the sky with the fog and the forest stretching out as far as you can see. And it's kind of my visual of, I guess, when I think of the Adirondacks, that's kind of what I call to mind, is just forest as far as you can see.
Yeah, I was going to say it was insane because here in Ohio, you'll see what looks like woods, and it looks like they go on forever. But if you actually look on Google Maps, you'll see that there's typically like a big patch of woods, and then it's another person's property, and then you'll find some woods. But the Adirondacks, Seth sent out the drone so we could get some footage, and you can look at it, what the drone is capturing on a tablet. And so we were kind of watching the footage that it was gathering, and we stayed in these little remote cabins when we were up there filming. And I was thinking it was kind of something like that, where it's just like a patch of woods and whatever. It's like, no, he sent the drone up, and as far as you could see was trees. Mm-hmm. And it was crazy. And then he turned the drone around and looked behind the cabins, and as far as you could see, literally. And Dave and Pam, who are sighting witnesses, just the other day, Dave was contacting me on Facebook and was talking about his property, and he showed a screenshot of Google Earth of where their property is, and literally just the entire screen was just green. It was just completely filled with trees. It's just insane. So to think that there's so much area for something to hide up there.
Yeah.
It's insane.
It does stretch the imagination when you get into Ohio, because like Brandon said, the forest, there is a lot of forest in Ohio. I would never deny that, especially southern Ohio and kind of that thumbnail that runs up the northeastern side of the state. But it's still, you have people, farms, and there's still, even in the most rural areas of Ohio, you've still got people living back in the woods. But you go to New York and it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. And a lot of times, like when I moved to South Carolina back in 2008, And people, when you ask people around here, you say, well, what do you think of when you think of New York? All they think of is buildings and concrete. And I have news for them. That's not the state. I mean, that's certain areas. But, man, there's a lot of forest. In Pennsylvania, too. Yeah, I've talked with Stan Gordon. I don't know if you've ever spoke with him.
Yeah, I love Stan.
Yeah, he's done tons of investigations in Pennsylvania when it comes to Bigfoot, and I think he said that, I believe it was 1976 was a big year then too in Pennsylvania. He said a lot of sightings. I think it was 74 or 76, but in that time, he said there was a lot of sightings.
Yeah, it's right around the same time that the Chestnut Ridge was seeing all that activity, and he did a book called Strange Invasion that kind of went into all those weird Bigfoot, UFO sightings. And it's funny because I'm not a UFO Bigfoot connection guy. I'm fascinated by the fact that sometimes the reports do overlap, but it's funny for someone who's not necessarily looking for that connection. It's happened in both of our movies so far, because the Minerva case, we had the sheriff actually told us he only ever investigated 2 unusual incident reports. One of them was the Minerva monster case, and the other was 2 weeks later when a UFO landed directly across the street from a family who reported the Minerva monster case. So
wow.
I can't seem to escape UFOs because the Whitehall flap is surrounded in UFOs. It's not quite as overt as the Bigfoots, I guess.
All right. Hey, guys, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take the break just a few minutes early here. And what I want to do is hang up with you guys and then call you back. I'll call you back, get you back on the line after the break. And hopefully we'll clear it up a little. You guys, I mean, I'm understanding what you're saying, but at times it is getting a little shaky, and I'm really loving the conversation. So I want to make sure everybody can hear it well. So, all right. So I'll call you back in just a few minutes. So hang on with us.
All right.
All right. Thank you. All right, everybody. We've got Seth and Brandon, and I understand the audio is a little shabby. Where I'm trying. I think they're on Skype, and of course I'm using Skype to bring them in, so that could very well be why. So, but a good conversation tonight. And this is a great story. I suggest that you do check it out once they release it. We do have their website linked up on the homepage at latenightinthemidlands.com. So you could go check them out, and as soon as they release it, watch it. I'm telling you, it's good. It's good. I mean, folks, I'm a really big skeptic. I always have been when it comes to a lot of this stuff. UFOs, I've seen them. Okay, I believe now. All right, but Bigfoot and stuff has always been kind of hard on me. But I will say, I'm believing more in Bigfoot. And they give him this crazy name like Bigfoot, and it sounds like a joke, like a clown. I think I personally think he's extraterrestrial. I don't want to be like Giorgio Tsoukalos, everything's the ETs, but I mean, I really believe that. But I need to take this break, folks. This is Late Night in the Midlands. I'm Michael Vera. We've got Seth and Brandon, and we'll be joining them again when we come back.
My opinion is if they're real, it's an undiscovered ape. I mean, I'm pretty basic flesh and bones kind of guy. I think the evidence points to that in terms of, the footprints and what those lead us to believe about their physiology and biology. I believe the reports that I hear seem to be describing some sort of upright walking ape. I think apes are very intelligent. I mean, we just discovered that new type of chimp in the last few weeks. So there's still animals being discovered out there all the time.
Yeah, but this guy's 7 foot tall.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, this is why I'm a little on the skeptical side is where do they go? What happens to the bodies? I mean, we know that, there's supposedly have been accounts of mountain gorillas, burying their dead. I don't know if that's what they're doing. I mean, obviously, I had a guy talking to me on Sunday about this, and his belief is that
the alien greys are mixing DNA or something and creating these things. And I think there's a lot of theories about it out there, and I'm fascinated to hear, you know, everyone's opinion on it. But I know for me and what I've heard tends to point me toward, you know, that some sort of undiscovered creature and animal that is living in the woods. It's killing deer. It's, you know, ripping out the hides. It's eating it. It's stuffing it up in trees. It's leaving giant footprints behind. It doesn't seem to be, you know, building cars or anything. So I don't think the intelligence on it is through the roof. But I do think it's got to be a very intelligent animal if that's what it is, and obviously very averse to having any kind of contact with humanity.
I like that. Yeah, you make a good point there too. See, that's okay. So I guess there's good arguments on both sides, but you do make a great point that, okay, how about the deers that have been found in trees, you know, ripped apart? And you're right. I mean, you would think that if they were all that smart, they would find a way to, you know, I don't know, advance themselves a little bit.
Well, that's what I didn't mention that early on, but that is what got me into all of this, is those reports from my hometown when I was growing up. What people were seeing were Bigfoots on their property, but they were finding these deer ripped in half. Literally, the deer were being ripped in half and stuffed up in trees on people's property. And this is, you know, northeastern Ohio. We're not talking about mountain lions roaming around necessarily that would do that, although I do believe there are mountain lions in the state. How they would manage to rip a full-grown deer in half and stuff it up in a tree, I'm not sure. So that part of this equation has always been kind of close to home for me with like the deer kills and stuff because of, you know, where I grew up and what got me into this.
And just to rule stuff out, because honestly I haven't investigated this like you guys probably have, but were you able to rule out any kind of like occult type activities that might go on around the country? Where, I mean, there's nothing like that, right? Where there's records of people sacrificing the animals in the woods and hanging them in the trees. So, I mean, I don't know. That's why I'm asking.
No, down where I grew up, there really wasn't a lot of occult activity. And back on these people's property, some of the people that, you know, where this was showing up on their property are people I knew. If you were in a cult, and involved in a cult or whatever, and performing some sort of satanic ritual on their property, you more than likely would get shot in the head within 10 minutes of starting. So, I mean, you'd be taking your own life into your hands to go onto some of these properties, you know, in the first place. So it was and obviously the fact that it was happening in correlation with these sightings was even weirder.
Mm-hmm. All right, we've got a call. We've got Ira on the line. Ira, welcome aboard.
Hey, so one thing that I wanted to comment on real quick, you guys were mentioning the dead bodies thing, and something that a lot of people don't think about is that there are a lot of animals that die in the forests. There are a lot of, like, you go through down in the jungles down in South America, for instance, and there are no, like, monkey bones just laying all over, littering the forest everywhere. Those things deteriorate pretty quickly. It takes actually a pretty special set of circumstances for a set of bones to remain intact for extended period of time. So, you know, if a number of years has passed by since one of those creatures has died and has been left somewhere in the woods, it might be actually disintegrated completely by the time that somebody were to run across that same area. And bear in mind too that there are still so many places, even here in the United States, that have never even come close to being touched by a human foot in the entirety of history.
But that being said, now we should also note that there's been bones found from 1,000 years ago or more. You know, they find bones sometimes. So
that's true. That's what I was meaning about the very special set of circumstances that is required for those things to become fossilized. Bones to become fossilized, they have to have a certain number of different factors that are involved for them to become fossilized, and if they don't have that, then they actually will just disintegrate in the ground.
There's a fascinating stat about this that I always botch because I can never remember it, but there's actually no fossil record of, again, I'm probably going to botch this, but I think it's like a chimp. In its actual, there's no fossil record of that animal. They've never actually found the bones of a dead one in the wild. Now, this is, he makes a great point. I mean, bones deteriorate really quickly in the wild, especially here in Ohio where we have this really acidic soil. You can track a deer. They did this study where they took a deer out in the woods, staked it down, and the body was completely gone in 2 weeks. I mean, dead black bear are a massive creature, and they're rarely found in the wild. So we have, we have defenses for this particular argument, but I'm kind of with you. Like at the same time, a 7 foot tall, 7 to 10 foot tall, upright walking creature, you'd think that one of those would pop up somewhere.
Well, exactly, yeah.
and I'll say this: growing up, we didn't play all the video games. We didn't have smartphones and all that. My friends and I, we spent a lot of time in the woods, like the Genesee Gorge, the river there. I mean, all over the place. And, there was times we'd be down there at night as teenagers, having a few beers. We shouldn't have been, but we were. And in the middle of the night, and I'd hear those screams you're talking about. But I've never seen, I used to blow it off as, well, it must be a raccoon or something. But I mean, literally, it sounded like women screaming. Is what it sounded like.
Yeah, I had a similar experience when I was camping with my parents one year, way long time ago, back when I was a kid. We used to go every week, and we were up in Michigan at one point in time, and we were there camping, middle of the night. We were just kind of sitting around the campfire, and all of a sudden there was this huge howl that came up, and it was, it sounded human. It sounded like a human almost screaming, like loud as hell. I'll just put it to you that way. It sounded like it was quite a distance away, but like it was right there next to us, kind of thing. And then a few minutes later, from the opposite direction, there was another call that came out. Now, this wasn't a wolf call. This wasn't any kind of animal that I had ever heard. Like I said, it sounded literally as if I was like listening to some sort of a human kind of creature. And I've always wondered if it might have been one of the Sasquatch at that point in time. Who knows? I'm not saying for sure. It was in Michigan. Okay. It was in Michigan. It was near. I can't remember the name of it at this point. It starts with a C, but it's about 50 miles north of the Indiana border. There's a big forest that's there, and we were camping basically right in the middle of it.
Cool, nice.
Yeah, well, I get to see one, and believe me, I'm looking more now than I ever did before. So. I plan on taking a trip back to New York soon. I'm hoping to be there for my dad's birthday. Hopefully he's not listening. And so I wanted to surprise him with that. And so who knows? I have to hit the woods when I get in New York again.
Well, one thing I wanted to say as well, real fast, and then I'll let you guys get back to it. I listen to my elders a lot. I'm Native, and I listen to a lot of the things that my elders have had to say, and they talk about the Bigfoot, basically call him Big Brother. A lot of them will talk about the fact that there have been interactions with, the different peoples here in America and them for a really extended period of time. So, there's definitely something to it, it's what it is and exactly what it is. I can't say for sure, but it's a very interesting either way.
Exactly.
Well, they don't sound like Chewbacca.
No, not quite. Not quite. Well, thanks, Michael, for having them on. This has been a great show, and you guys are doing great. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Ira. I appreciate the call. If anybody else wants to call in, you could do so at 803-392-4566. I'd love to hear your Bigfoot accounts, folks. You've got me. Tonight's the night for that. A lot of times, guys, what they'll do is we'll be doing a show on some kind of political thing or what have you, and then they'll want to call in with their Bigfoot stories. And it's like, we can't interrupt for that, but now we can. So if you've got something you want to share with us, by all means, go ahead. And guys, I tell you again, I used to have a guy who used to call in the show on a regular basis, and he told me that he used to feed these Bigfoot. They'd come to his yard every day, and he would feed them. But when I asked him, why don't you get pictures, he said it was disrespectful. They were something about Native American spirits. And I mean, but he swore up and down that he fed them. And I'm thinking, I'm a nice guy. Why don't they come? I'll make them some toast or something if they're hungry.
It's weird too about a lot of these cases where they feed them and stuff, and people are like, why don't you put up trail cams and that kind of stuff? And it seems like every time these individuals put up a trail cam or any kind of security camera, the things don't come around at all. Like the activity completely ceases immediately. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people speculate about whether they can smell the whatever the trail cams are made up of, and they know it's unnatural, and so they choose not to come in the area. Or if there is some kind of paranormal energy happening there, or whatever. But it's definitely interesting that the activity seems to stop. Now, does that point to does that lend credibility to it, or does it take away credibility from it? You know what I mean? That suddenly there's this thing coming around all the time, and you can't get a picture of it.
Yeah, and typically trail cams grab photos of other. I mean, we have trail cam photos of gorillas and all that kind of stuff.
So why would these creatures be any different from any other animal that shows up on a picture?
And I'll tell you, I've experienced that myself every time, and I've had now in my life 8 UFO sightings, and there's been about 4 of them that have been incredible, that I could say, yes, definitely was a craft, and somebody intelligent was controlling it. I don't know who. But every time, it either it's at a time when I don't have my camera with me, and the one time I did have the camera and we took the pictures, it didn't show up in the pictures. But we seen it clear as day. I mean, it was there. So it's amazing. And I had a photo expert who went and blew the photos up and looked, and he says that, with the pixels, he could see it in there. He could see like a triangular object, but I can't. He says it's there, and I know I seen it. But me personally, I mean, I know me, my wife, and our son seen it. And then it's not in the pictures, and you got to think, what the hell? So maybe they've got some kind of technology that they use to, maybe they do know. Maybe it's just the same with the Bigfoot. Maybe they know. Maybe they can sense those frequencies.
Yeah, I mean, this is what I know I've heard, is that if these things are real and it's an animal, if it is an animal, it seems to be extremely evasive and patient, to the point that, we hear accounts of these things. People see one, and then it ducks down, and it stays in that position for hours. And the person, sees it move later, or they eventually it just sneaks off or whatever. I think if they're this evasive to the point, patient and all that stuff, they probably, anything that they have a sense might be related to humankind, they probably just avoid. I mean, if they sense that an area is being targeted for, to kind of gather evidence or whatever, they probably just avoid that area and move on to another area. I mean, for all the talk we did earlier about how much, or how little forest is here in Ohio, I mean, it still is extremely forested, and there's definitely areas where you can go in this part of the country especially, and get away from, people. Like Brandon was talking about Wayne National Forest here in Ohio. That's a massive national forest. It's it's huge. It's like 1 million acres. It's a massive national forest with no one around, no roads. There's always places to go and pockets of woods where you could find, to hide out. And it's interesting that where the most reports are in the United States always correlate to those forested regions. It seems like if it was all a hoax, that wouldn't line up. That you'd have tons of reports coming out of Arizona, and tons of reports out of, who knows, Hawaii. But instead, it seems to be these states where you would kind of expect it to be. So you've got Ohio, and that's the other thing, is it isn't just the United States. It's also correlating to forested regions of those states. So we've got Ohio. We don't get a ton of reports in the western part of Ohio where the farmland is. We get it in the eastern and the northern part of the states, or the state where all the forest is.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It really is, and I've had folks who have suggested to me that they could be part of the military-industrial complex, and that they, maybe we don't see them because maybe they, either they have, and here we go at conspiracy theories, but they have some kind of cloaking technology or teleportation, or they're able to just vanish underground quick and get to their stations. I don't, I'm told that there's tunnels everywhere underneath the within the earth. Well, maybe they know the exits and entrances to these things.
I was going to say too, real quick. I heard somebody talking about the Pacific Northwest, which is where a lot of these Bigfoot sightings happen, which makes sense because there's so much forest area up there, up into British Columbia and all that. And they've said that, I forget the exact amount, but it was like 25 plane crashes have happened in the Pacific Northwest that have never been found.
I think it's 75.
Is it more than 25?
I think it's over 70.
So it's a big number of plane crashes that have never, ever been found just in the Pacific Northwest region. And that tells you it gives you kind of an idea of how vast that area is. And so when you think about it really does sound crazy that they can evade people for this long. But when you have areas like that where no human beings are going, and they haven't gone ever, for thousands of years if ever, it makes a little bit more sense that maybe these creatures, especially if they have a small population, if they're like, I think one estimate I heard was like 6,000 of them, individuals in the whole country, or the whole planet or whatever. If there's a small population and they're up in an area where 25 plane crashes have never been found because it's just so vast, you can imagine how small family groups or individuals could survive undetected.
Well, that's very true, and I've said that myself. But we talk about exploring other planets, which I'm all for. We haven't even completely explored this one. Matter of fact, I think we're going to destroy it before we completely explore it.
Right.
So there's a lot of things we don't know, and I'm sure there's a lot of species, prehistoric species that are still big ones like giant sharks in the ocean. What do you call them? There, the
Megalodon.
The megalodon. Yeah, people have reported seeing it, and I'm betting that it probably goes so deep into the ocean that we couldn't track it, but. What are we doing that's making some of these creatures come up from where they've been, What are we doing to the planet that, they have no choice but to interact with us now because, who knows? The ocean's getting hotter and they're saying, woo, better get up there where it's a little cooler. Bigfoot, who knows? Eventually we might do so much to the forest where, these guys are just standing in the middle of the road. And there's
that's one thing I was going to say about that was, we were talking with somebody the other day, and they asked us about the kind of rise of Bigfoot sightings in the 70s, because you had the Patterson-Gimlin film come out in '67, and then you had Boggy Creek come out in the early 70s, and you had a number of other kind of references in pop culture to Bigfoot, and all of a sudden you have most of these huge cases that happened in that same time period. So some people were wondering, do you think it's kind of this mass hysteria happening because of all the movies that are coming out, kind of the Patterson-Gimlin films being widely distributed? But also, if you think about it, at that same time, we were just starting to really get into deforestation. Like the highway system was being built, right?
Yeah.
When did that start? In the 60s? The highway system? All over the country. So all of a sudden you have, huge amounts of deforestation happening. And I'm not saying I'm not saying it's causation, but it is kind of.
See, it's funny because my argument is counter to that, because my argument is that especially in Ohio, you've got the logging that took place in the early 20th century wiping out. Ohio used to be, what is it, like 90% forest, something like that. Now at one point it dropped down to where it was like 5% forest, but it's actually back up to. What's the number I use? Like 70. It's a large percentage of Ohio has been reforested. And if you track the sightings in Ohio, they correlate to the reforestation of Ohio. So it's like in the early or the late 60s, early 70s, when Ohio finally starts getting that second growth or new growth forest back in, that's when the sightings start coming back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, it's at some point I would hope that we could get to the bottom of it. It's just like, I guess it depends what field you're in. You bring up UFOs at work, or Bigfoot at work, and it's, people think it's fun conversation, but a lot of people don't take it too seriously, and
right.
They're so busy in their daily whatevers, and now with their smartphones and all that, and I think it's all connected. I think that all this stuff is important, not even just Bigfoot, not just UFOs, but the paranormal in general. I think it's all very, very important because, while we get distracted by the events that happen here in the third dimension on this planet, I think that there's a lot more happening that we're supposed to be learning about. We're just so totally distracted. So I credit you guys with going after stuff like this and sharing your findings with everybody. That's awesome. And I hope that you'll keep doing it because you guys really do a good job. And when will that be out again?
April 1st. That one will be available on DVD. Minerva is already available.
And one of the listeners asked, do Bigfoots have families? Did anybody report to you about seeing families of Bigfoots?
Well, the Minerva case, there was frequently cited as possibly being accompanied by two smaller individuals. There's some confusion as to if the two smaller individuals were panthers or if they were smaller versions of the creature. We have it both ways in the film. We have one witness saying they were cats and one witness saying that they were two smaller ones, juveniles. So I think from what we hear, when people have sightings, they're usually of a solo individual, but there are sightings of one or two or even three at a time.
Yeah, look up the, what is it, Osman? Albert Osman?
Albert Osman sighting.
Yeah, if you're not familiar, look up the Osman sighting. He was camping, and I'm not going to tell the whole story, but he was camping in a sleeping bag in the middle of the forest, and he was picked up and carried off into a location, kind of kidnapped, and then kind of corralled by this family. It's a really interesting case, one of my favorites. But it definitely deals with the mom and pop and then two children. So
I see. I had, as far as cryptic type creatures go, the only sighting I had was back in 2010, I think it was, or was it 2011? It was at the studios here in WOIC. My assistant and I had come out for a break. We were doing a radio show, and we came out for a break. It was the middle of the night. I don't know, probably like midnight. And we're standing out there having a cigarette, because I smoked at the time. And in the sky, we see something cruising along. It's black, totally black. It was huge. It had a big wingspan, and it was flapping wings, as a matter of fact. And it had, like, on the end of it, it had like feet. It wasn't so much of a claw. It almost looked like feet, and to this day we wonder if we didn't see the Mothman that people report. It was no owl or any of that. I mean, this thing was huge, and it was just like a black shadow in the sky. It was pretty incredible, and that's all for me, and I've never seen it again since then.
Are there other sightings in your area of anything like that?
To be honest with you, I've never actually looked to see if anybody else reported it. I guess that's something I should probably do.
Yeah.
I have looked for the UFO sightings, and I've seen a lot of people who had reported seeing kind of the same color object anyways, but they describe it a little differently than I do. And I think that's what happens with some of these things, like especially when it's a UFO. You might see one thing, and then by the time it gets to my area, it seems like they could change with the lighting that they do. They have a way with their light, the way they manipulate light, that they could change the way they look. It's incredible stuff. But no, I never followed up with the Mothman type sighting, if that's what it was. I don't know what it was.
There's all sorts of they call them flying humanoids, and here lately I hear reports all the time, and I think I've heard of reports down in South Carolina.
Yeah, you know, the only problem with South Carolina is that I'm not too excited about getting in the woods here and searching for much, because, you know, if you either got poisonous snakes or poisonous spiders, and you got cats that will eat you if you get in the right parts. And so I feel better in the New York woods than I would here in South Carolina. I don't know. It's just things that like to take you down here, I think.
That's all it is in the South, man. That's the forest. Everything wants to eat you.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. So I don't enjoy the woods here as I would or used to in New York, because I just don't trust them here. There's too much. And, you know, I'm not from here, so I wouldn't recognize it probably, and it'd get me. So, but hey, guys, anything that you want to get out, anything you'd like to finish with tonight, I want to give you the floor to go ahead and do that. And I thank you guys very much. And as you put out new projects, please keep me in mind. I'd love to keep having you back and talk about this stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, if people want to keep up with us, they can just go to the smalltownmonsters.com or facebook.com/SML Town Monsters. We're on Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff too. So obviously the big project for us at the end of the month is the Boggy Creek Monster crowdfunding. So if anyone is interested in what we're doing, we're going to run that crowdfunding campaign, and basically people can help us make the next movie by contributing to the campaign, and they'll get some awesome stuff in return, like behind the scenes content and access to our next movie, Beast of Whitehall, and t-shirts and all kinds of stuff. So, and that's going to go live on the 31st. So other than that, do you have anything?
No.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, when you get that set up, send me the link and I'll share it in our chat room over here periodically.
Awesome, I will. That'd be great.
All right. Well, listen, guys, I thank you very much. You've re-piqued my interest in Bigfoot with your last project, your latest project, that is, and I can't wait until it gets out and everybody could see it, because it's worth seeing. Thank you.
Thanks so much, man.
All right. Have a great night, my friend. Friends.
You too.
All right. Good night. All right, everybody. There they go. We've got them linked up on LateNightInTheMidlands.com.
It's possible. Is this better?
That is better. Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
I'm probably eating the microphone.
Hey, I've been there, done that. All right. So yeah, let's hear your story, Brandon.
Yeah. Am I distorted at all, or is this good?
No, you sound good.
Okay. Actually, I never had an experience, but my dad had an experience when he was young. He was camping in Marietta in southern Ohio in the Wayne National Forest, and he was camping with his family. They were sleeping inside of a van, and he couldn't sleep, so he was sitting up in the driver's seat of this van, just kind of staring off into the darkness, and he heard these 3 extremely loud, long scream roars kind of thing, and he described it as being kind of starting off like a man screaming and then ending with like an animalistic growl, and he said it was way too powerful for a man to have done, because the power that was coming out of whatever was making these sounds was, the lungs must have just been extremely huge on it. So scared him half to death. And then I kind of, later on when I was like in my early teens, I got really interested in the UFOs and stuff, just like Seth and Bigfoot. And I was on a website and found this Bigfoot website that had Bigfoot supposed vocalization recordings. And I was playing through them, and one sounded just like what my dad had described when I was a kid. And so I brought him down and showed it to him, and he got goosebumps, and he was freaking out because it was pretty much identical to what he had heard. And the recording I played for him is the Ohio howl. I think it was recorded in '94. Is that right? So
I think so.
I think Moneymaker recorded it in '94, and it was exactly what he had heard. And it's interesting because I listen to a number of other kind of radio shows that are kind of in the subject, and there's a lot of people that will come on and they'll tell their own story, and a lot of them will describe that they've heard that same kind of sound. They'll always refer to like the old howl and stuff, which I just find really interesting. It's cool because it corroborates my dad's experience, and then it also kind of lends a little bit of authenticity to these things kind of existing a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the sound is distinct and it is described by many who. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to Late Night in the Midlands. How are you?
Good. How are you? Thanks for having us on.
Oh, thank you for being here. I appreciate you taking the time out to be with us. And I've got to say, I was telling the listeners, I've been doing this for over 8 years now, and I've never had the interest in Bigfoot that I do now. It's picked up, and you know what? You've added to that today because a fantastic job, and I've kept my word. I've not shared it, but boy, I'll tell you, it's good.
Awesome. That's fantastic.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Oh, absolutely. So why don't we start out with a little bit of background with you guys? And I mean, what got you so interested in I don't know, the unknown, I guess, the paranormal, the hairy creatures?
Yeah, well, my story is pretty bland. Brandon's is actually a lot more interesting. But basically, I've kind of had an interest in, UFOs and Bigfoot and all this kind of stuff since I was a kid. But back in the early 2000s, a friend of mine told me about a series of possible unusual creature sightings outside of the town I grew up in, which was this tiny town in southeastern Ohio. So I kind of started researching it myself, and I guess you could say investigating it, but investigating it basically consisted of me driving on dirt roads at night. And so I came to find out, there might have been something to it, and that was that's the quick and dirty version of what kind of got me into all of this, is that, just kind of going down and actually talking to a couple of people who might have seen something and realizing that there might not be a quick and pat answer to the whole phenomenon. But again, like I said, Brandon's story is a lot more interesting.
and I definitely want to hear it, but I do want to, I don't know if you're hearing it, but there's a little distortion in your sound. I mean, it's not horrible, but it's there. I don't know if it's, if you're too close. It almost sounds like you're too close to the mic. And I don't know.
That's
glowing red
from the source.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the way he made it sound like with the beams, I was wondering that too. Was it just reflections coming off the eyes or not? But it seemed like there was more than one description of this creature having red eyes, at least.
Well, this is something that didn't make it into the movie, but there is a history in New York State, obviously, and we go into that a little bit, but there's a history in New York State of these creatures, but there's also historical mention of the eyes. And I'll probably try to get this as an extra on the DVD, but Paul talked a little bit about how the Native Americans referred to it wasn't as upfront as they had red glowing eyes, but it was more like it had something to do with the eyes being, like blood red or something. It was kind of a little more vague, but it was, if you wanted to read that into it, you could almost read this into that native kind of cultural thing.
Well, if you go into a pet store and stuff, sometimes you'll see rabbits or mice or whatever that have red eyes. So I guess it wouldn't be unusual, right?
No, it wouldn't be unusual, but it's the fact that they seem to have their own luminescent glow, even when there aren't any lights around. So that is unusual, especially in this Whitehall case. There's out of everyone that saw this thing, I swear it's got to be like 60% of the people that saw it up close. It might have been everyone recounted seeing the red glowing eyes. I mean, it seems to be constantly referred to in this case.
Mm-hmm. So what made you guys want to take on the Whitehall account? What was so unique about that one?
The Whitehall case for us, I think what kind of spurred us to go ahead and do this is that Paul Gosselin, who was he's in the movie as much as we can get him in. He's, audio tape interviews, photos, and all that kind of stuff. He was one of the original witnesses, and he actually passed away in May of last year, actually the same day that we premiered our first movie, Minerva Monster. It was the same day that we premiered that movie.
Who claimed to have these encounters. Now, the red eyes, the red eyes and even the beams coming out of the eyes, now that's something that's kind of new to me.
Yeah, that was new to me too.
I find it interesting.
Yeah, I knew of the red eyes, and I've heard the red eye reports obviously a lot, but I'd never heard anyone refer to a kind of beams shooting out of the eyes. And we saw that interview that I think you're referring to, that's in Beast of Whitehall. We saw that interview recently. When was that? Back in, I want to say November. It was
Which interview?
Yeah, the Cliff Sparks.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
It was after filming had wrapped is when we kind of came across that interview, and that ended up in the movie kind of late in the game. But I thought it was kind of vital because you hear a lot, if you're associated with that story, you hear a lot about Cliff Sparks and his sighting and these red eyes. But I had never heard that thing. He talks about how basically it was almost like laser beam shooting out of its eyes. And we've talked a little bit, Brandon and I have talked a little bit about that as maybe he was just interpreting the eye glow in that way. I don't know if you have a theory on that or not.
I don't know. I mean, I've always thought, like when you shine a light on wildlife, you'll see eye shine. And I always wondered, like for example, in the Whitehall case, this creature was seen off the side of the street, kind of in the light that comes off of the side of the car lights. And so it could have just been eye shine in such a way that maybe their eyes are they're just there in such a way that they give off a red eye shine in some way, and they're not. So it's not like, I don't know if it's actual. They're glowing red as if from like a fluorescent source, like bright red, or if it's some kind of just kind of eye shine. But I've heard other people like Scott Harriet, who has described it as when he saw as the eyes shining like the glow of an exit sign. Like in a movie theater, like an exit sign coming out, that kind of strong. Or another person, I think, didn't even Brian describe it as the end of a cigarette, like when you take a draw or whatever, like that kind of glowing red. So that, in those cases, it wouldn't be just some random eye shine. It would be like legitimate.
Passed away, and we had already been discussing doing the Whitehall movie. In fact, we had decided Whitehall will be our next movie. And when he died, it kind of gave me a kick in the butt, because at that point I wasn't 100% sure we were going to be able to do it. It was more like, let's do Whitehall if we can afford to go to New York and make this movie. And when he passed away, it kind of lit the fire under our tail to say we got to get this done. And it's a fascinating story, not just because of the location, which is this amazing rural, isolated kind of section of New York, and the beautiful mountains and all that kind of stuff. But it's a really unique story because there's so many police officers and law enforcement officials connected to it, which I've never seen in another case. In fact, I don't think anyone has. I don't know of a case where you've got 11 members of law enforcement at the scene of a Bigfoot sighting.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because that's exactly what intrigues me most about this, is the law enforcement that is involved and put their necks out on the line talking about this, and they talk about logs that went missing and all kinds of stuff, and I'm thinking, wow.
Yeah, no, the story is multi-layered, because you've got two stories at play, in my opinion. You've got this story of the three kids in the car, which on its own is a fascinating little, kind of side jaunt. It kind of calls to mind those classic like 70s horror films or something. These three kids on a back road see a monster. But then you've got this other element that's like, an entire section of law enforcement. You've got local law enforcement, you've got state law enforcement, city. It's a lot of people that saw this thing, and to me it's two separate stories, but it's really kind of cool because you've got at the center of it
the Gosselin family, because you got Paul as the teenager seeing it earlier in the night, and then you've got his father and his brother, who were the police chief and a law officer, seeing it, in two separate occasions. But I just find it fascinating that every story we go to, we try to find that what's at the heart of it, and it always seems to be people. And this story definitely has that. But it's